No, you were actually, everybody was right on schedule. Very good. So if you have questions, you have cards. You can write those. Regina, where's Regina? Back there. Since we have a moment, I'm going to ask a question, and it's really directed at everyone, so it'll give you all a chance to write your questions. So the relationship between educators and parents for children who are in child care centers or Head Start programs, or children who are in a home-based setting, or even kids who are at home with their parents or someone else, is very close. And it's just I've seen what that relationship is like, but yet somehow by the time those kids get into pre-K or kindergarten in a formal schooling setting, some of that connection to parents is lost. Mm-hmm. And the information, I think Ralph referenced it, the information that parents have about their kids is vital for teachers to know, especially in those early grades. And I'd like to know if any of you have any examples or things that you have seen that have worked in making that transition for kids from wherever they're coming from before they get to formal schooling, and how they connect to the teachers who are in the classrooms that they're coming into.
So I have some notions of that, because I spent a lot of time training teachers and guiding teachers and programs. I think it is creating the welcoming environment, the notion that every child is uniquely amazing and precious, regardless if they come in a package with developmental delays or challenging behavior. And there's a way that you can communicate that to children as children enter into programs and into classrooms. Barriers to it have been when teachers, in early care and education, and if you're teaching in childcare, you might work from 6:30 to 6, and you barely can get out to go to the restroom and to have a bite to eat. And so when will I connect with a family? And I'm not going to get paid to do it, and it's not valued in my program, is problematic. And so really quickly, I think the stress of that kind of situation becomes so much that I have even lost my capacity of how I would do it should I have the opportunity to do it. When people do it brilliantly, so there's a program that's just launched to implement the pyramid model program-wide in Atlanta, Sheltering Arms, and they serve mostly a population of children in poverty. They just were showing off to us yesterday about some of the things that they were doing. They get bread donated to the program, and I think they also do a breakfast once a month. And so they get people in the community to donate that. So on the packages of bread, they've put a little tip for families around social emotional nurturing or a teaching practice. So the parents picking up the free bread because they need it, picking up some information that they can do, and asking about it. What's this on my package of bread this week? And having a conversation about what we're doing here in the program and how it's important for your child. Another program is doing multiple community events. So every month, parents know that there's some way I can plug into this program and be a part of it. There's not just one way, and there's not the way that's uncomfortable for me. Believe it or not, parent-teacher conferences are pretty uncomfortable for most parents, and especially if you think your kid has needs. But what might be more comfortable is to come when the firefighters come to show off the fire truck and talk about safety and why safety is important. What might be more comfortable is to come when the person comes from the Lions Club to do vision screening, and I can help line kids up and be a part of that and get my child screened as well. And in every one of these contacts, we're having contact with families. We're pulling them in, and we're bringing community in to nurture those relationships.
Yeah, I might just add to that we focused a lot on teachers and what preparation they need. But I think that the question of parents is also directly related to like what happens when you walk into the office. You know what I mean? Like the first person that I usually see when I walk into a school is a school secretary. And if the school secretary feels disrespected and hasn't been included in the conversation and nobody's paying attention and nobody says good morning, and probably the parents are not going to get such a warm reception. I think school leadership matters a lot here too. How does the principal talk to the parents? How do we receive parents that are perhaps coming from a cultural context that's different than the mainstream one where the school exists? Are we inviting parents in for culminating events around wonderful things that their kids are doing, or are we only asking them to come into school when little Johnny has gotten into trouble? I think all of these things give sort of both direct and indirect messages that are really important in terms of how to engage parents. We also have an explicit engagement with parents as part of our curriculum. Kids take materials home that they're supposed to work with their parents on. We do lots of parent workshops that are specifically aimed at helping the parents to develop their own SEL skills and to do sort of the educative part of making sure that they're on board with the messages that the kids are getting at school. And so it's really thinking about, the kid as sort of the nucleus of, an entire galaxy, right, of folks and influences that all kind of have to be moving in sync with each other to be able to get that kid, the support and the love and the warmth that they need to be able to achieve academically.
Let me add to that. Some of you are familiar with Karen Mapp. Karen Mapp, who is on the faculty of Harvard Grad School, has developed what's called the dual capacity approach, which really goes to building the capacity of both the teacher and the parent to participate in a productive pairing, a productive partnership on the kid. It's really a remarkable program. It was adopted here in the District of Columbia on an experimental basis, paid for by the Flamboyant Foundation, which combined the in-school parent-teacher partnership with a teacher home visiting program. And it was remarkable, both in terms of when you hear teachers talk about it, it was remarkable in terms of their practice. You hear parents talk about it, it was remarkable in terms of their parenting. And when you look at the numbers, you find it was remarkable because, in fact, it did reduce dramatically student absences and increase substantially student academic performance. It's really worth paying some attention to, and we've got examples right here in the district.
When in the schools, the site Travis Heights Elementary School is an example in Austin, where we were able to work with them over a 3-year period. They were able to develop some programmatic changes. They're very involved with parents. It has seeped down into their culture as a campus. Now, I don't want that to be a one-off. We've got to figure out what is the Parent-Teacher Home Visitation Project. That is a beautiful way. Programs help to support our vision. Programs shouldn't be our vision. And so how does the program support the larger vision that we want to approach? We want to have better engagement. So when we have engagement with a child, and at Travis Heights and in many of our communities, we know someone else is coming up. After my daughter, there was 2 more coming up. If that school has a relationship with me and my daughter and my wife, they're going to have a relationship with my sons. And so you do that. It's probably going to be awkward at first. It's just hard transitioning into school when you haven't been there. But if you're really intentional about that relationship, about communications and relationships, it all comes down to that, but you got to have a plan. And that's how the programs become the plan to reach that end that make it inviting.
Okay, thank you. This is a completely different question, but since I'm not going to screen questions, Success Academy Charter School CEO Eva Moskowitz says in defense of suspending so many kindergarten students, 5-year-olds do violent things. How would you respond?
Can I take that?
You want to
Go right ahead.
Yeah. I find it extraordinary, right? This idea that, 5-year-olds do violent things. And this idea that somehow by pushing a kid out, perhaps into the place that has the trigger that caused them to do the violent thing in the first place, that somehow we're going to solve the problem, seems to me like the most ass-backwards way of dealing with something that's actually there, right? So great, 5-year-old does something violent. I mean, I also just, as a flag here, I have to say that I really, on a sort of core and heart level, have a problem with somebody bragging about suspending 5-year-olds, in part because of what I opened my remarks with. The stakes are too high. The stakes are too high. So, we go back to the question, like, great, so 5-year-old does something that maybe in some context would be considered a suspendable offense. My assumption is that that kid has some skills, right, that are lagging. That they didn't have the full range of options where they might have made a better choice. That maybe asking them sort of how they're feeling and what's going on and what can I do to help you, and do you maybe need a timeout or do you need a snack, might be more effective ways of dealing with that behavior than saying get out. And that doesn't mean that we don't have consequences, right? Within the restorative framework, actually, I would say that the consequences are much heavier, because what we're saying is you are responsible to the community and the community is responsible to you. So when you do something that falls outside of our community norms, you are responsible for making amends for that. And starting that practice, really, and it is actually about sort of practice and skills and skills and trial and error, when the kid is 5 years old, means that by the time that kid gets to high school, they know the drill.
Okay, the research and theories for systemic long-term change are right on. However, what do you all believe are solutions for right now on the ground? For example, if a first grader hits his or her teacher, what would be the alternative to suspension that resets the behavior and also makes the teacher feel supported? And that can be for anyone.
I've been hit. So, connected to the question you asked before, she's a bully. She's a grown woman calling out 5-year-olds for behavior. We don't support bullying behavior. We don't reward the bully. Why'd you hit me? What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you call me blankety blank? What's going on? I've never found it in my experience that the name I was called or the physical act that was put upon me was about me. It was about something else. I just happened to be there. Now, does it mean I just excuse it and we don't talk about it and we won't work through it, and I'm not an angel and I'm not perfect and I don't want to present myself as that, okay? But you have to ask questions and have to be willing to take a breath and a step back. But that's just not, it's just difficult to do. But we have to be able to ask a question, why?
Pam Cantor, who is a child psychiatrist in New York, who did work in the Balkans during the war, was asked by Mayor Giuliani to go into New York City schools after 9/11, because he was concerned that the kids in the school would be traumatized by what they had witnessed. And she spent a year in the schools, and she came out and she told the mayor that the trauma experienced by the kids had little to do with 9/11. It had to do with their lives every day. And she was part of an effort that essentially looked at the cortisol levels of kids coming to school and found that the cortisol levels of some kids who were coming to school, a large number of kids who were coming to school, essentially was so elevated that we were asking them to do things that they just couldn't do. And everybody knows that cortisol is a fight or flight hormone. And the fight or flight hormone operates to suppress cognitive functioning. You know, when that tiger is coming after you, we don't want you to sort of take a moment to wonder whether the fact that you can see the teeth might mean the tiger is smiling. There's no time for cognitive functioning. You've got a binary choice. You fight, or you get the hell out of there. That's the choice. But we have kids who are coming to school in that, biologically, in that state. And then we say, oh, by the way, we want you to learn. It's telling the kid who has a language delay, you know how we say, use your words? Right. Well, we have this essentially set of contradictory behaviors that ask kids to do the impossible. And in many respects, the challenge that Dr. Cantor defined is how do we create a sense of safety from the time that kid walks onto the campus? Because we've all felt that hormone, we all felt the spike, and we know that it can be rapidly, it could go down very quickly once we feel safe. And she found that too many schools were not organized in a way where the adults saw it as their job. Job one, this kid has to feel safe. Because if the kid doesn't feel safe, the kid is reacting and responding in a way that's biologically quite understandable. And you're right, having nothing to do with the person directly in front of him. The kid might as well, and often do, hit somebody else. You know, the interactions between the kids and between the adults is somewhat propelled by the biological state of that kid. And that's why, you know, by the way, I happen to like Eva a number of ways, but she is so damn wrong on this notion. This is why we end up executing juveniles.
That's right.
That somehow it's about the act of the kid. That's what is important here. It's a 5-year-old. And we cannot and should never say that there's something violent about the 5-year-old and they do violent things. That's so nonsensical. I can't believe that somebody I know said it out loud. And I hope she says that she was misquoted. You know, we've got to understand these are kids. And we've got to ask the question, what's going on in their lives? What's going on in their heads? What's going on in their bodies? Let's understand that and frame responses that make sense given the context and not have some prearranged package that have no relationship to the kid in front of us. So let me applaud you for taking that position, because that is really, it says, I remember this as a kid. And if we first begin saying there's a kid to whom we have an obligation, then we can't say out loud, as a matter of fact, that this 5-year-old do violent things.
Right. I want to add just one thing. The other thing to give up is the notion that a punitive response changes behavior.
Yeah.
That's not the path to change. It's about prevention. It's about promotion. We need to respond to children's problem behavior in a way that redirects them to what our expectations are, that we connect with them again, that we understand where the behavior comes from, and take action then to deal with it. But a punitive response is going to do nothing to change behavior.
That actually feeds into the next question. One point reiterated was the need to change mindsets and structure. Thinking about those who are outside the choir, those who are outside of education, is there evidence, real, research evidence that suspensions do not change behaviors and therefore don't really serve a useful purpose?
Well, I only know it from the birth to 5. That's my area, so I won't claim that I have the knowledge of your kindergarten through grade 3, although I think it's logical. I mean, what does a suspension do? It traumatizes a child, and it causes extreme disruption for families. And yeah, maybe it gives the program breathing room to figure out what they're going to do, but at the sake of what it does to a child, that just doesn't make much sense at all. I don't think there's any evidence that suspending a child would change behavior. It just defies logic to me.
So this just mirrors the zero tolerance of the 80s.
Correct.
I mean, research, time, numbers, all indicate that this type of punitive approach doesn't work. So on a national level, we're starting to move away from that approach, albeit not fast enough for me, but we're moving away from that approach. Why should that not be also the approach of education in general? That we know that this doesn't work. We know it doesn't change recidivism rates. We know that we're just populating prisons, our ISS rooms, and our alternative learning centers with things that we're with people that we are uncomfortable with. And I would argue that many of the people in those spaces are the fact that we are uncomfortable with certain behaviors. And it not only is about them, it's about our discomfort to make us more comfortable in the space we live so we can get them the hell away from us so that we can be more comfortable. And so we know that nationally it doesn't work. We have to move in another direction. It should include schools as well.
Is anyone aware of any international models of early child care and education that we can learn from on this issue? And if you're not, it's okay.
I mean, I think that we know, right, that, countries that come up in the rankings as doing better than we're doing here, right, have teachers spending a lot less time in the classroom just delivering instruction, right, have a social net that starts from conception, right, which I think is another important thing to talk about, is like what happens before a kid gets to school, right? We know that robust longer days, actually, but that are sort of infused with many of the things that we think of as being extracurricular. So again, art, music, playtime, time for athletics, et cetera, sort of infused in a longer school day, all very helpful. So yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of international models that more effectively integrate social emotional learning throughout the sort of educational experience, and they have the results to show that it works.
Mm-hmm. This is for you, Ralph. Uh-oh. Huh? Can you speak to the impact of the Common Core adoption on pushing students out of classrooms? Referrals and suspensions are specifically mentioned, but is there anything you can say on that? Or anyone else, really? Feel free.
The Common Core gets blamed for everything. Look, having a more rigorous curriculum and having more rigorous standards, really, really good idea. Having more rigorous standards that are more consistent across the country is a really, really good idea. Working on the standards, then having to work on the curriculum, then having to work on the assessment, all should come before we essentially use it and misuse it for purposes of professional, because we should work on the standards, the curriculum, the professional development, and the assessment. And basically what has happened is that rather than spending and investing the time, the effort, the resources on the first four, we have rapidly moved to take this brand new, untried, not fully tested, not fully developed, and then confused it in terms of that whole issue, gotten it into the issue of teacher assessment and teacher performance. And that's really ended up confusing what it still is a really, really good idea, and it's really occasioned a whole lot of pushback. But I don't think that we as yet, just that we don't have enough evidence to begin to push the Common Core as a way of evaluating the performance of teachers, I think we're way too early to blame the Common Core for student suspensions. We're way, way, way too early. The Common Core is a good idea that needs time to develop. We need some additional time to refine and tweak. We need the time for professional development and the like, and we ought not to give it too much credit for changing the world, and we ought to not give it too much blame for things that preceded it and will be here long after the Common Core's got a new name, and we're all feeling more comfortable about more rigorous standards and curriculum.
Okay. And I think this is also addressed at anyone. How are you directly addressing racial injustice and bias, and also centering and lifting up cultural empowerment to advance the alternatives you've been describing?
I mentioned earlier about different programs that we're attempting in Austin, and the union working with the district around some of those programs and community schools. One of the programs that I found interesting was a creative learning initiative. The one thing that saved me in high school, kept me from dropping out, was theater. It was just the one thing. Before I came today, I had a relationship with my theater teacher, Jim Lippold, and I texted him back and forth about this opportunity. It's inspired me a great deal, and it kept me there. So I value the arts a great deal. In elementary, I went into an elementary school the other day, stepped into a classroom, and they weren't just doing a book report. The kids were actually dressed in costume, representing a character, up out of their desks, believe it or not, and expressing their learning. Now, that may not be monumental for some in this room, because I know we're progressives. But when you go from classroom to classroom to classroom to classroom that is limited by a curriculum that is connected to accountability, that keeps people from succeeding and is tied to an appraisal that can get you fired, those realities and that type of environment doesn't always happen. And to see a child, my son, dressed up as the fantastic Mr. Fox and performing in a way and being able to express himself was really kind of a magical moment to see all the kids. I had a principal talking about our creative learning initiative, which is in 3-feeder patterns and promotes the arts in the classroom, saying, yeah, and the kids are out, they're out of their desks walking around. Take that sentence and put it in any other context. The kids are out of their desks and they're walking around. Call the AP. The kids are out of their desks and they're walking around. What's going on with that teacher? Doesn't she have any control? That sentence doesn't have the same power, positive power, than in the environment that was the context it was set in, because it's the arts. We know kids have to get out of their desks. We know that kids have to walk around. Why do we limit that? I got to get out of my desk. I got to walk around. Why shouldn't my boy be able to do the same thing? So one of the initiatives, that I just wanted to illustrate that how we infuse arts, and it doesn't take a program to do that. It takes a teacher's willingness to say, this is my curriculum, and this is what I'm going to do. And believing what I'm going to do will respect a curriculum, but also respect that child's need to learn. And that ultimately has a huge impact on behavior and all the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, so within our work, we start at a very core level of guiding teachers to think about their connection with each individual child, what pushes their buttons about each individual child and why that might be, how to engage in some reframing of that, perspective taking and understanding that child and where that child is coming from. That's just one of the practices at that relationship level that we think about. We also pull that out and have them reflect on that in terms of their collaboration with others and their collaboration with families. Every one of the practices, when we start from the place of knowing and understanding deeply the child within family culture, the child within family, within community, and that all of their thinking about how to support that child comes from that lens. So rather than, I don't quite know how to describe it, but it's a different orientation towards always having a posture of support for children, of always trying to be at a place of understanding before we take any kind of action, including what we plan, what we teach, what we're going to talk about, what book we read, what pictures we put up in the classroom. And I think those things are really important. I think we haven't gone far enough. I don't think we even really know how do we tackle things like implicit bias? I wish I could say confidently, we have this research or this intervention, but we better figure it out because it's serious and it's going to cause really serious consequences for kids of color and kids in poverty.
So in true SEL fashion, we talk about it, right? We make the conversation explicit in our teacher training, in our teacher coaching, in a no-blame context, right? We all have implicit biases. You're the adult in the classroom. Part of your responsibility, right, is to think about, to explore, to examine, and then to redirect as these things come up for you. I think that the no-blame framework is really important. Because nobody becomes a teacher to persecute kids, you know? Similarly, we make issues of diversity, of bias, of prejudice explicit in our curriculum. You know, the kids are aware, right? I mean, we have this like idea that if we don't talk about it, they won't notice. And it's like, no, they're noticing, and if we don't talk about it, they're not talking about it, right? You'll see it. There are folders that I think you all got about Morningside Center programs. There's a description in there of something that we do called diversity panels, and there's also a beautiful video on our website with one of the diversity panels, where basically the idea is that in a classroom and in a school where we've already sort of engaged with the deep professional development and where they're implementing the curriculum with the kids and the kids are building their skills, that one way that's really sort of powerful to get through and around some of the biases that we have is by sharing stories, right? I mean, and literature, of course, the reason why we infuse the literature into the SEL work is because one of the best ways to access the maximum number of stories and places and people and lives that we otherwise wouldn't have access to is through books. So yeah, we talk about it.
Okay, can I just, I'm sorry, but can I just say,
Go
you
right
mentioned the
ahead.
word story. We do a great deal of work in Austin around DACA, DAPA, and immigration reform. And the key component of the Dreamers and the Dreamers movement is story. It's storytelling. It humanizes everybody. And you break down from just being this person on the other side to a person I can relate to. And I don't know how many of you were at Teach, but we had a teacher here, Mary Elena, and she talked about in her classroom, she's a DACA-mentored teacher. And she talked about immigration in her classroom. She talked about her own personal story with her students. And one of her little kids, one of her first graders, he raised his hand and he said, I want to say something, but you got to pinky promise me that you're not going to say anything. My parents aren't from this country. The level of trust in that classroom for that type of a confession and the fear that must accompany that kind of confession is amazing. But it couldn't have happened without storytelling. It couldn't have happened without vulnerability on the teacher's part to share and to open up and to become vulnerable. And it's powerful. Our stories, I want to encourage you today, share your story. Don't ever be afraid to share your story. It makes us real. It connects us as human beings.
Ralph, you had something you wanted to, not on this question, but you had another point you wanted to make.
That was such a powerful point that I really,
All right.
This is the wrong time to make that
Okay,
point.
all right, that's fine. And this is actually a question related to the last issue, but I think a bigger, broader question, and that is, because these issues disproportionately affect Black children and brown children, and to the point of getting these strategies beyond the people in this room to the broader community, have we given thought to framing this conversation not in the context of ECE equality and access, but in the context of racial equity and justice?
Mm-hmm.
And should we? What do we gain? What do we lose? Anyone? Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, that provides we are from the Data Foundation, the Casey Foundation. We do data. And so whenever we're having a data conversation, there's always a kind of a inclination to interrogate the data. And let me just say that I have not looked close enough at the data to know whether the assumption that we are operating on is fully accurate. I'm aware of one school district which will go unnamed, but anybody who looks closely at my resume will realize immediately what the school district is, that use suspensions not to punish the student, but to get to talk to the parent. And that unnamed school district had a large number of 3-day suspensions. A kid would be suspended on Friday afternoon until Monday. And the purpose of the 3-day suspension was to get the parent to come in. That a large number of 3-day suspensions, which had nothing to do with punishing the kid, that had to do with reaching the parent. So the encouragement here is to interrogate the data, because it may very well be that the overwhelming number of suspensions really are about punishment and really about the misguided notion about what 5-year-olds can do. But the interesting thing is that suspensions may be used in different ways for different purposes. And if that's so, then we might have to broaden the conversation. And it might very well be in that school district, some of us could have asked the question, is there a better way to get parents to come in? At the time, those of us, and notice I say us, who were sitting in responsible positions of the school district, thought that we were doing right by the student by making sure the student did not lose any instructional time, but we were sending a message and using a technique to have a parent conference for a parent who might have found other things to do with their Monday morning. So the invitation here is let's together look more closely at the data, see if we could parse it a little bit more, figure out whether the assumptions that we've been making cover the field, and if they don't, figure out whether there's some things we could do. Because what I'm thinking about, if people are still using the 3-day suspension, they're being captured in the data, and we should have a conversation about how you establish a relationship with parents, so you don't need to use this particular technique to get them to come in. So that was the point I was making. As we go down this road, I was feeling more and more uncomfortable that we were assuming something about the data that just may not be true, because I don't know if any of us have interrogated it closely enough to know.
Well, that is a great example of data informing practice, right? That it should change the practice in that unnamed school system if that's what they were doing. So I'm going to take off on a different type of question here. I'm interested in the type of ongoing PD for teachers and their assistants that is used to build the social and emotional relationships. What kind of time allotment is there in schedules, and how do they do it?
So I think I was speaking about professional development and classroom coaching as being pivotal. I think you start with first defining the practices. That's really clear and important, and we need to know, teachers need to know, what is it that I should be doing, and given the tools to do that. And we can do that through core training, as well as establishing a climate within our program, within our school, that fosters those practices. The coaching piece of this that we've engaged in, and we've conducted a little bit of research on, I've conducted research both on using someone who knows more about the practices than the other person, that is kind of an expert model of coaching, as well as a peer, getting two co-teachers to be able to support each other as they embark on trying to get more proficient at using a practice with fidelity. What's a challenge is, obviously, when we present this at early care and education program, it's like, who will do this? And how do I pay them? And who's the person who provides that? And one thing I try to guide them to think about is that coaching is a process less than it's one person, that it's a professional development strategy, that coaching can be differentially used dependent on need, but we got to be informed about what people need. So we actually use tools, an observation tool, to understand where's the teacher now and where might she go next, or he go next, paired with teacher's choice about what they might want to work on. if you look across all the coaching models as that are effective or that people have some literature behind, they all have basic core components. They all have some kind of observe what somebody did, make a plan to do something, observe what they do, and give them feedback about supportive feedback and constructive feedback. And when we've done that for early educators, they love it. And they love it because we're explicit and we're supportive and because they can grow. It's not evaluative. It's not high stakes. It's about, I'm going to get better at doing the thing that I want to be doing. Yay. And someone's going to help me get there. I think with technology, not only can we differentiate coaching, not only could we think about different coaching partners, peers, or experts, but we can also do it in different ways. We can use distance kinds of elements. We could do it live. We can do it as a group, as a collective. And so I think it has a lot of promise there for that. Unfortunately, the research data I have on it, we invested a lot of time. We wanted to get people to fidelity. We wanted to see if you put the pyramid practices in your classroom, would it make a difference for children? And so we delivered pretty heavy doses to get teachers there fast so that we could measure outcomes in children.
One of the things we do in community schools is to figure out how to coordinate services. Mm-hmm. A lot of schools have lots of services, mm-hmm. not coordinated, they butt into each other, they overlap, they duplicate. You got to think about how they work together and are they the right services needed for kids? And services, programs, academics, lots of things that make a school successful. I think one of the things we've got to really think about, because we've talked a lot about problems and concerns, but I think kind of moving this to kind of what are the barriers to our success and what can we do or what could make some of our work more successful. We were having a conversation before we started today. You have cultural or creative learning initiative. You have SEL, you have cultural proficiency and inclusiveness. You have these different programs within a district. We do. For cultural proficiency and inclusiveness, we've got one person running it. We're a district of 84,000 children, 12,000 employees, 6,000 teachers. That's a heck of a lot for one person running. I thought I had a hard time in a classroom of 35. So this is something that we've got to think about. Now, we have a department of SEL, social emotional learning, that has, I believe, 17 people employed in it, which is great. That's what you need to have. And then you have creative learning initiative that has not quite in between, but a few people in it. So instead of having these in our overused frame or term of siloed, I think the more we talk about silos, the more we reinforce them. I haven't seen a breakdown yet in the last decade. But how do we come together? How do we bring those programs together? So if I got one person, inclusiveness and in cultural proficiency, that's really dealing with the race issue, that's really dealing with privilege issues, that's really dealing with the hard stuff of this that nobody wants to talk about, that needs to be infused in the social emotional, in the creating learning initiative, in our community school. It needs to be integrated, and all the social emotional needs to be part of the inclusiveness, and I mean that stuff has to communicate. And that's where I think we need to do better as districts, and I certainly know that we want to work with our district to do better. Why are they like this? Why aren't they together? So integrating programs, integrating funding, integration so that we have all the supports we need and we're smart about what we're rolling out and no one's getting worn out and runs away because we don't have the right supports for them.
Mm-hmm. We have 9 minutes, so I'm going to just ask one more question and then I think I'll give every panelist just a chance to say one last word if they'd like. This is actually a really specific question. Add a few like that. So can you share some strategies for working with a child with challenging behaviors when the family of the child is not interested in helping bring about change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this question is very timely because it's something that we're thinking about a lot, particularly with restorative practices, right? So we have schools where the administration is very bought into restorative practices, where teachers are very bought into restorative practices, and we're getting pushback from parents. you know, either the parent of a child who's been harmed who says, no, I want that other kid suspended, or the parent of the kid who has done the harm who says, well, what are you going to, aren't you going to punish my kid? You know, what's the consequence? I mean, I think that the question that you're asking goes back to what's the preventative work that we can do, right? Kids are more likely to behave the way that you want them to behave if they think that you like them and if they think that you care about them. So, family that's not interested, not looking to participate, I think that so much of this has to do with sort of how we position what we're thinking about in our subconscious, right? It's really easy to go to the place of saying, well, this family is just not engaged. This family is just not engaged. They just don't want to have anything to do with the, you know, with what's going on with their kid. They're dumping it all on me. And I think that part of the practice and one of the strategies that can be really kind of useful is just to integrate into one's practice the mantra, you never know what's going on for someone else. Mm-hmm. Right? So just starting from that place, taking the step back and trying to, even in a moment of like deep frustration, trying to cultivate compassion. As far as the kid goes, I think that the key strategies are about retrenching in the relationship building and in the reinforcement for the kid that they're a part of the community. They have a responsibility to the community, and that your job is to help them figure out what skills they need to make a better decision next time. So again, right, with the questions, what's going on? Is there something that I can do to help you? Is there something that you need? And of course, preceding all of that, right, checking yourself as the adult. If the kid is acting out, you're probably pretty triggered. And this goes back to the last question that you asked, which is like, what are sort of the appropriate functions of coaching? I mean, aside from all the other things that we heard, sometimes coaching can be really helpful just in the sense that we know that teachers are more likely to push kids out of the classroom when they themselves are feeling really stressed. And so the coach can just be there as a sounding board. So I guess that I would start with those things. First, check yourself, check in with the kid, try to give the benefit of the doubt to the family for whom you may not have all of the background information that's relevant to the situation.
There's a practice in child welfare that's called family team decision making that may be helpful here. And in family team decision making, we understand that the parent may be sufficiently distracted, sufficiently burdened, have so many things to do, that it's not going to work just to depend on the parent to play the parent role. And so I remember that Andres Alonso, when he was in Baltimore, really was given serious consideration to turning report card nights and the other events into more family team, and family being broadly defined as including any adult, sure, or even an older sibling who was important to the kid. That the kind of the dyadic approach, which says it's about the parent and the child, in a whole lot of communities won't work as well unless we explode it and ask ourselves, who are the adults in the lives of this kid who could care about this kid and who could play an important role in helping that child? And the way we talked about it, we said, when you have that report card conference and you say, you know, you've got to get Malik more sleep, you've got to get him a quiet place there, you better go get his glasses because he can't see the board, 4 or 5 things come up. There are only 2 things we can predict. 1, most of those things are not going to happen. And 2, that parent won't show up next time. So imagine if you had 2 or 3 adults who were involved in that conversation, and then one adult could say, okay, I will take Malik to get the glasses, and somebody else. If we could figure out a way to help adults share the load for kids. And what we found in the child welfare system is that we could reduce time and care, in some cases by up to 50%. If we use family team decision making than if we rely simply on the single or even the 2 parents to accomplish the multiple tasks that it would take to get that kid out of care. And I think that's one of the practices that could be imported into how we see schools and how we see the relationship that would put less of a burden on parents who are already pretty burdened and would give the school access to a larger range of adults and skills and assets to work on behalf of the kid.
Okay. We have just 2 minutes, and I'm going to actually come back to something that Ralph said, which was he was here to learn. So the one thing I learned today is that there are tremendous resources and people doing really wonderful things, and we have to figure out how we can make sure that the people who work every day with kids in schools and programs know about those resources and have access to them. There isn't enough of that. There are too many places where teachers are going it alone every day, and they don't have the supports that they need, and that needs to be what our mission is. So I'm going to give each of you now 25 seconds to say one thing you learned today. You had yours.
Oh, one thing I learned. Well, I don't know if it's one thing I've learned, but one thing I'm reflecting on really deeply is the critical importance of letting go of the notion that to address this problem, we need to figure out our discipline strategies, our punishment strategies, the okayness or not okayness of something like suspension, and be solidly in the place where we're thinking about promotion and prevention, and what will it take to bring that to our programs.
I want to ditto that. And then there was a specific line that you said that I really loved, which it's not about a program, it's about
It's not programmatic, it's systematic.
it's not programmatic, it's systematic. I think that that's a really good mantra to walk away with, even though I have several programs that I would love to talk to all of you about.
And I want to talk to you about your programs. And so that, so this is where the communications and the relationships work. And what I learned today is that there's a lot more people out there doing the very work that we want to do in Austin, and that we don't want to be isolated. We want to keep reaching out, keep communicating and building relationships locally, statewide, and nationally so that we can benefit our kids. I think lastly is we just can't give up. It doesn't matter the obstacle. As soon as we say it's so-and-so's problem, it's a parent's problem, it's a principal's problem, we forget about the kid. And we can never forget about the kid.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That was good. Good line.